wake-up call for people like they've never seen before. He who has the most toys wins. Bumper stickers are headed into the trash.
Yes. We're all going to have a whole lot more real things to have to concentrate on. Yeah.
Okay. So war, in the sense of Iran, nuclear war, confrontation with Russia.
Doesn't show the data. We can be wrong, but it doesn't show.
Well, if you're not seeing anything, that's extraordinary.
No, it isn't. It isn't that we're not seeing anything, because we're seeing a very high level of concentration within the U.S. populace on things military, but it'll be degradation. But the way we're interpreting it,
all right, go ahead.
I would say it's having the need to close down hundreds of military bases and haul troops back, because we actually are at the point where pretty soon, within months, we wouldn't be able to meet a payroll, a military payroll. No one would accept the dollars. Once the Russians and the Chinese get out there and announce that they're no longer using the dollar in inter-country trade, that'll be followed by, it'll be a cascade effect, and then the only people who will be using dollars will be the U.S. And so someone will quite legitimately say to us, well, I don't want $55 for my barrel of oil. I want 1,000 of your dollars, because they're worthless. I'm not sure I can get anything at all for them. And that's realistically what has to occur, because we've sold the planet 16 or 18 or however many times the planetary GDP in absolutely toxic, worthless pieces of paper, and expected them to buy it.
Of course.
That's the curious part.
Geopolitically, militarily, there may be a vacuum created if we begin to withdraw. And the Chinese, of course, will exploit that, and others, to no end. The Chinese will love it.
Well, no, I would dispute that. I'm sorry, but...
don't be sorry. Tell me. Because
my view of the Chinese goes back historically, and knowing a lot of Chinese individuals and their culture at a very different level with the language.
Will they be pulling out?
They're not territorialists. They don't really want to rule the planet.
No, I wouldn't. That's not. I'm sorry, I didn't express myself. They're investing themselves very heavily in Africa, South America. They have over 5,000 corporations and companies now owned by the PLA. They're running around the world. This is the kind of replacement of that military presence, quasi-military presence, because the military is just an agent of corporatism, that the Chinese would exploit, I would think.
That's correct. On a resource level, you're quite correct, yes. They're certainly at the level of resource competition. And this is where we get the idea that we're going to go to a calorie-based at some form of global trade levels. And it's going to be...
Calorie-based?
I'm sorry?
Calorie-based?
Calorie-based, in the sense that all economics is basically calories. If you think about it from the beginning, you're a farmer, you have a bunch of wheat, you grow more wheat than you can use, you have excess calories to sell.
We're getting back to pies again.
Correct.
We always get back to pie.
We have a fixation, there's no question about that. Well, you live in the rain like this, you know what it's like.
I do. All right.
1 or 2 pies a day, that's not too excessive.
As long as the pie crust is vegan, that's okay.
Oh, yeah, no worries.
All right, so we're going to see some major realignments here is what you're talking about. Pretty obvious. You don't have to have tea leaves to figure that out. All you got to do is go to halfpasthuman.com and subscribe to what is, without question, the world's most fascinating reading. I've never read anything consistently more interesting or more accurate. And yes, they do make mistakes.
Oh, sure,
but I wouldn't even call them mistakes. I would just call them misinterpretations. If that. But then the data, of course, could be
accurate,
responsible.
Screw up,
yeah, you never know. All right, back in a minute with Clif High, and do visit halfpasthuman.com, and those around there, if you've not been there, you've got a treat in store for you. Okay, as we sit on the threshold of a day tomorrow, which will be a day that will go down in history, Clif, what do you see tomorrow night? What's the data show us? Inconclusive in terms of political and governmental mechanisms, but nothing of a national catastrophe. No major rioting and so forth. That would certainly go hand in hand with the prospect of a sweep, a major victory, an unquestioned victory. One wonders if one were to add up the Nader, Ron Paul, Cynthia McKinney votes, and sort of tape them together with the McCain-Palin votes, what kind of we'll know tomorrow if your projections, as you interpret them, are accurate, but nothing catastrophic.
No, and the reason really to a certain extent is the idea of like harmonizing with universal archetypes and what's going on in these various cycles. If one knows how to look at time appropriately, it's rather obvious that we're in a period of transformation that's going to lead into maybe even some level of transcendental, that is to say, we'll transcend ourselves, morphing in later years, and that transformation has to start somewhere. The political process, I don't particularly like it all that much, but it's a good emotional place to get this sort of process going. And we have to harmonize with it, and we're at that point where the dollar is dying. There isn't anything we can do about that.
Well, it's kind of like sports to Americans, but
yeah,
sports have a different color.
Yeah. And we're at the end of a number of cycles relative to our ability to expand throughout the planet. There's only so many countries you can shove your military bases
We're in
until
retract.
you've got them all.
We are actually. I think it's already begun a retractive mode. Although they're not pulling the soldiers out yet. But your statements, I think, are extremely interesting, and very pragmatic. And I think that we know the money's gone. They're out of money. They can't keep playing these fairy games, and yet Obama wants to move into Afghanistan with more troops. He wants to cut down a few more brigades in Iraq.
Yeah, but what he wants is relatively immaterial. No matter, I mean,
what do you get? You win the Afghan war, and you get a pipeline. Big deal.
Yeah.
I don't understand it. One pipe. We've got as much oil in one location in Alaska as Saudi Arabia has. We've got as much oil off the coast of Louisiana in one tract, according to the Cornell University Geology Department, as has been used since the beginning of the age of petroleum on the planet. That's one tract.
However, we also have to look at things in a very fundamental level, at a resource allocation level, because we have to understand that, yes, there are indeed the potential for all kinds of offshore drilling, but you must recognize that if you drill offshore in geologically sensitive areas, that is to say that are prone to shakes and so on, that you're going to lose a lot of wells instantly with a good-sized snap and an earthquake, and we're due to go through a whole lot of those as we transit.
Okay.
So I would not presume that any kind of well drilling in an offshore capacity is going to be sustainable.
We have the estimates in North Dakota now have been just increased by, I think, 400% over what they were. The Canadian tar sands a little harder to get. Yeah. We've got a 400 to 500 year supply of energy at the current rate of consumption here in the United States.
And that's all
in coal, if we were to use that in an environmentally sane way.
But all we really have to do is to spend a little bit of thought, because every single day in, I think, 3.5 hours around the equatorial band of the planet, enough sunlight falls to power all of our cities for years.
Of course, all we have to do is let the late murdered Stanley Myers knowledge out, and we go hydrogen-propelled vehicles, in a few months. It's all there. Alcohol, you can raise your own crops, sorghum. We had that issue on this program.
But see, there's again is a problem, because with all of the bio crops for fuel, you run into the issue of the top 6 inches. And that is to say, the whole planet, all of us in our billions, survive on a very narrow band of the top 6 inches of topsoil.
Think about that, folks. Clif is so right, and I've said this for years. It's literally a matter of inches. At the top of this entire plane, if you look at it as a plane that we live on, the surface of the Earth, is a 4, 5, 6 inches of topsoil. That's where it's all at. It all happens right there. Take a shovel and go look if you don't believe me.
And it's to the point now where, too, the number of the elite are recognizing this, and they're making some funny leaks, if you will, sort of preconditioning people to certain ideas. And in Canada, you'll note that there's a few ideas that are coming out, which I find very interesting anyway, just from an engineering viewpoint, of growing vast amounts of food in high-rises that are designed specifically for that purpose.
Tell me more. Well,
they've done some calculations that suggest that they could feed most of Canada, I think, in 46 or 47 buildings, if I remember the number right, but it's immaterial. It's under 100 of these tall high-rise structures that are self-recycling. They reuse a lot of the materials. They provide a 100% effective vegan diet, of course artificially lit.
How
But the
interesting.
heating and the cogeneration takes some of the energy load off, et cetera. So it's actually quite fascinating. And it can be done for a reasonable capital cost that wouldn't exceed the amount that Canada is putting into their farms in any given, I think, 5-year period as it is now.
How much longer? Go ahead, please.
I say, but it means a radical transformation, and we may actually need that, and they may be preparing us for that because we're going to be faced with some huge biospheric changes, no matter what anybody's view of 2012 is about. Our solar system is only 3.5 degrees wide in an astronomical sense, and our sun is about 0.5 degree wide. And in 2012, that sun is going to align with the ecliptic plane of the Milky Way in a way that is going to be potentially producing a huge amount of energy of unknown types,